Hey, this is Adam Swan with the SOC Prime team, and welcome to the third weekly talk with SOC Prime. So this is the third weekly talk since June, so we're thinking we'll call it soon the monthly talk, since that's the cadence that we've arrived at. So I think for quality purposes, it will be better this way anyway. So last time we went through a challenge and I didn't actually get any responses, so we're just going to reintroduce that challenge. There's a bit more listeners and attendees this time around, so maybe someone this time will finish the challenge and get a little kudos on Twitter is what we're currently doing for that. So let me share the challenge. Okay, so it's on my personal GitHub, which is github.com/ACLARC, and I'll also tweet the link out to the challenge as well after this, and it's also ACLARC on Twitter. So the challenge number one, it's the second challenge, started at 0. I consider it pretty easy, and basically what you're trying to do is discover what these files are. So we're not doing the MIME type. It's actually going to be what the extension would be in Windows to get them to execute, because they're basically first stage payloads as a hint. So there are 3 of them, and they're not malicious in themselves. They're just simple POCs that do things like launch Notepad or launch the calculator app. But because they are simulating an attack, some AVs or other software might complain about them. So definitely recommend only using them in a lab, so no one or inspecting them in a lab environment, so no one gets in trouble or has to explain why they were accessing malicious files. So sounds good. And I'm also here with Andrii.
Hey Adam, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
And so this week Nate isn't able to be with us. He's off enjoying vacation time. So this week we're talking about what it means to have a good threat hunting team, to build it out, the people, processes, and tools involved, and also what it means to be a good threat hunter, and maybe some tips and hints on how to improve your threat hunting operation. So first we're going to talk about people. So Andrii, what do you think makes a good threat hunter?
Yeah, so before we dive into skills and processes, I think there's some industry general things that people need to be good at, like hard skills can be earned, right? But if we talk about soft skills, the person who's a hunter needs to be creative and curious, right? So hunting is a process of discovering unknowns, right, and interpreting them and translating them into some actions and something that you can act on, right? So pretty much it should be a person who's always open to learn something new, right, and continually evolve, right, because that's the way how you find the attackers. Yeah, I mean, that's the general guideline, but I guess we could dive a little bit into general knowledge, what a good threat hunter should possess. And yeah, Adam, maybe you have something to share.
Yeah, I agree. So like one thing about incident response or threat hunting or digital forensics in general, it's really important to gauge the types of people you're communicating with. So like that soft skill is super important, because if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, leadership can get very excited at the simplest, moment. Like you could say, hey, we saw a 25% bump in scanning today, and now leadership thinks that directly correlates to someone trying to hack us specifically. But so it's like, you just have to kind of be aware of your intentions and what you're saying. It's like a soft skill is something that I've definitely learned, and they've seen people make that mistake of getting everyone all spun up over something that's that's small. So I think holding your cards a little bit when you're doing triage is really important, but it shouldn't keep you from reaching out for help from additional tiers, right? So if you say, hey, I'm looking at something, I can't figure it out, and you have additional resources, like you have a malware analyst or you have an intel analyst or some trusted partners that you feel comfortable reaching out to, that's cool. But really, you don't want to get your leadership too spun up over things that you just aren't really that sure about, because now you have this deadline that's 15 minutes or something like that before they decide to call the $1 million team and to take care of things. So I think that's one thing that I've learned as a soft skill to highlight. But also, like, general knowledge as threat hunters, there's so much resources out there. One of my favorites is the books by, oh my gosh, I'm John Black. I'll grab it here real quick.
What's that? Oh.
Yeah, so like the books by No Starts Press, for instance, I think, shout out to them. Like, I've gotten a lot of useful information from them to increase my soft skills, and it also lets you do it at your own pace and time. So the other thing is obviously listening to these podcasts or these webinars. Come back every week, and we'll try to help and encourage you and point you in the right direction to increase your hard skills as well. But generally, I think there's a few categories of skills that most threat hunters would really benefit in knowing. And actually, first and foremost, I would say that every threat intelligence, or not every threat intelligence, sorry, every threat hunter should dabble in basic malware analysis. So you don't need to be capable of decompiling the MITRE, and looking at heavily encrypted or obfuscated malware. But you should understand basic Windows API calls, especially that. So a good way to get into that is actually by picking malware that's very easy to analyze. So your malware, like that's written in the C# for the .NET framework, can be really easy because tools like DNSpy do full decompilation for you, and you can literally, for the most part, see the pure raw source code. And with that comes a lot of insights into malware behaviors without having to worry about reading x86. So I think that's a good place to start. And also, most of the first stage type malware, like malicious Office documents, for instance, malicious link files, etc., they are also pretty simple to understand and glean a little bit of insight into adversary behavior. So I know personally, as an analyst, not only do you learn malware analysis, but you actually kind of become a better developer, and the way you think about problems changes as you look at malware, because you can actually steal some ideas from them. And a lot of malware analysis actually involves taking the code that the malware author wrote and rebuilding it in your own code, or writing something to deobfuscate it automatically. So you can learn a lot as a threat hunter dabbling into malware analysis. So then, without going too verbose on all the rest of these, but definitely digital forensics is huge. So not every box that you're going to be looking at as a threat hunter is going to have your EDR on it. Like, the deployment for every environment is definitely not 100%. Not everything in your environment has EDR, even though you think it might. So there's probably someone out there who spun something up one day without using the gold image, never attached it to the domain, and they took it to Starbucks and it got compromised, and now it's has this trust relationship that you might not know about with your network. And so like the ability to do dead box forensics or being able to answer those questions. Like a lot of times as threat hunters, we end up getting pulled into issues with like network quality. Like someone will say, hey, the network's slow today. It must be a compromise. This has happened to me as in the field. So yeah, like being able to look at just any box, Linux, Windows, and get a good, quick, warm and fuzzy if this thing is actually compromised or not is something that actually will really help you as a threat hunter to keep you back in focus and doing what you should be doing, which is trying to look at all your data that you're collecting and finding adversaries. So with that comes network forensics, very similar. Threat intelligence, a basic understanding. This is where one of those places where the MITRE attack framework can really help you, because it has not only has techniques and tactics, which most people focus on, but it also has all the threat groups listed for the most part, and with links to what techniques and tactics they're using, and further links to the actual reporting that's been put out about those threat actors. Excuse me. So that's really great. But probably the number one most sought after skill for a threat hunter is basically, with all that background information, the number one skill that you're going to be using the most often is data analytics. So you've got to get good at not just writing detection logic that is, if this contains this alert, like that sort of basic signature analysis. It works well for when it works, but there's also a lot of use cases out there that don't that won't work for. So if you need to correlate multiple events, or if you need to detect things like log drops and stuff like that, then yeah, data analytics is more than just if, and threat hunting is more than just if this contains this, let me know about it. So there's that automatic aspect of it, but there's also more manual aspect to data analytics and threat hunting, where you look at a lot of data at once. So one of my favorite techniques, and I think something that a lot of people can understand, is stack counting. And so stack counting is basically just taking an aggregation of interesting fields and looking at it. And I think that's a really good place to start. So if you, and 9 out of 10 SIMs will allow you to do this with some efficiency. So like Elastic, we're talking about data tables. Splunk, you're talking about the stats. And Sentinel is summarize, I think. So the summarize operator, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, everyone allows you to do it, and it's really a quick way to find outliers. But it's not really so much about finding outliers. It's more about taking 100,000 unique command events and turning it down to 10,000 unique command line entries. So if you can do something like that, you can all of a sudden be looking at every process creation in your environment and getting a basic idea of what happened manually. If you want to do that, I do that in most of the environments that I've been asked to threat hunt. After deploying all the automated stuff, I just start manually troving through lots of data. So, Andrii, did you have anything to add to that for hard skills?
I think that was a really good summary. I mean, yeah, just to retrace. So we talk about digital forensics, network forensics, malware analysis, threat intel, and data analytics, right? So from the real life experience, I would say it's really important to understand when to use what, because like when you mentioned about kind of informing leadership, we once had a situation where somebody informed our team, I can't disclose the client name, but like at almost like 9 p.m. I got a call saying, oh, we have this alert where we have a hash match on APT28 Like, can you guys go and hunt for that tomorrow? Like, I know we did not buy the service, but like, can you like spare some capacity? And there was also, this coincided with one of the national holidays. So we were like, oh, so we have to work tomorrow. So I ended up calling Vlad, and like, we got 9 people to the office. It was before COVID. And like, just because of one hash match, pretty much pulled out every TCP-based detection we had. So like all the Sigma rules, go through MITRE attack, like go through all the latest Intel reports, trying to figure out, is this even real? Like, could they be after something? Is it something new? And after, digging for pretty much entire day, drinking all the coffee and beer and everything else that was in the office, we found out there was no other match whatsoever on anything even remotely related, and any kind of compromise as well. And then on the next day, we found out that it was a red team exercise that nobody warned anybody about. And one of the guys used one of the OSINT tools, which also was used in one of the attacks, and the hash was matched. So that's just a case where, yes, communication chain is important one. Second, you always have to be top of the game with threat intel, right? In terms of not, like, getting IoCs in your team is not just top of the game. Making sure that you actually have all the latest reports and all the latest alerts, and actually have somebody on the team who reads for them. So we would at least say, yeah, is there a campaign going on right now in similar industry, similar country, or is this a new kind of unknown threats we haven't seen before? So yeah, because if we hunt like that, like really sprint hunt, I'm sure is the right term, but for everything, then it's going to exhaust the team really fast. So that's an important part, is also to make sure you manage your capacity and your resources.
Yeah. So so that kind of gets into something that I wanted to bring up as well. It's not really part of the people skill, but like talking about exhausting resources. I think a good quality of I guess it is more of a people thing. So like a good quality of someone who's leading the threat hunting team is going to be someone who is prepared to shield their threat hunters from being DOSed. And what I mean by that is sometimes when there's especially a sense of urgency in the air, what ends up happening is your threat hunting team is asked so many questions by third parties or leadership that they actually are not able to complete their duties as threat hunters. So it's important as leadership to gauge the quality of questions coming down to your threat hunting team and shield them from certain things. Maybe you can pass it off to a lower tier analyst. But a lot of people, when an incident is going on, everyone wants to talk to the smartest people in the room. And generally, when it comes to like especially incident response, your threat hunters, those are those guys. So yeah, help them out.
Exactly. Yep. 100% of that. All right. So shall we proceed to the next part, the preparation and knowing your environment?
Yes. Did you have some things you wanted to share first about that?
Yeah, I guess, it's always a good idea, like if you want an efficient hunting process, right, you should come prepared, which kind of sounds obvious, but like the more things you know about your environment, right, the better and the more efficient like you can be, right? Because otherwise if you have a good team, you will spend most of the initial weeks on actually learning the environment, right? Because you need to find what's happening out of the ordinary to find what is bad, right? So you probably should dive in on each part of that, right? So kind of, having a network map, having any kind of, information about privileged access rights will definitely help your team to focus on the right stuff. That's just sort of a high level summary on my end.
Yeah. So I think so as far as hard skills go, hard skills are the skills that you need to be concerned about for your own employment, right? Like you can take digital forensics, malware analysis, threat intelligence, data analytics, network forensics. You can go and take that anywhere. So it's something that you can really, in my opinion, you can focus on that a lot more on your own time, getting better at it by having a lab. But as far as knowing your environment, that is something that is heavily, obviously, custom to the environment that you're going to be doing threat hunting in. So it's not something that a lot of people focus a lot of time and effort on, other than just gathering the information over years of being in an environment. So, but it really should be something that you're focused on as a threat hunter, is what is my environment and how is it affecting my ability to threat hunt, and how is it affecting what is going to be targeted by adversaries. So you need to know, like, how are people accessing the network. So most people, you might think, are just using their laptops and that's it. But and authenticating through the domain controller or something like that. But is that really the case? Are there services that are exposed to the cloud that people can access from anywhere? For instance, a lot of folks today have their SIM on the cloud. Are you able to access that without VPNing in, etc.? Phones and other things. So I was recently with a customer who has like 5 different ways that people can access their network, and perhaps we're not getting the logs from everything. So be aware, like, what your gaps are. So a lot of people will just assume that what's in their SIM is what they have, but that's definitely, almost certainly, not the case. You have to be working with your operations team, talking to them, running to them in the hallway, asking them questions to figure out, okay, what is actually going on? How are people actually utilizing this network? How are my operations? How's my operations team managing servers? Are they using jump boxes? Are they VPNing in? Is there a Citrix special VDI environment that they use, and then they pivot to the domain controllers? Or are they all using vSphere remote access to manage stuff? So, like, all those sorts of questions are really important to know like what an attacker has access to, what technologies out there that they can pivot with. So this is something that's not really covered that well in the MITRE attack framework. It's kind of covered, but it's just like called valid accounts. So like, if an adversary gets a valid account, sure, that's the valid account technique, but no one really, I don't think that it really reflects the reality, which is if someone gets an account, it's not just that they have access to the Windows environment, but potentially they have access to your Citrix, like your virtual infrastructure, your network switches. That kind of thing isn't really covered in the attack framework. Like, they can move with whatever technology you have, as long as someone can authenticate it to it, and an adversary can move there. So it's just something to be aware of, including not only your stuff, but partners. So yeah, go ahead, Andrii.
Yeah, I just want to say that, yeah, pretty much we always need to establish a baseline and find, like, things that look out of the ordinary. So even from basic, like, valid accounts, right? If you have a VPN session that's been on for 7 days, right? Or you suddenly have your admin working weekends and nights, that's going to raise suspicion, right? That should raise suspicion, and it shouldn't be seen as normal behavior, right? So, yeah, we've seen quite a few incidents there where adversaries would just use a site, breach the VPN server and use the VPN in to pretty much pretend they work as the admins on the network. So the only thing that gave them away was actually, the working hours, which kind of having the knowledge that you don't have a 24/7 admin team can easily give you the right clues. Yeah, so it doesn't always have to be attack specific, but on the other hand side, if you really want, like, if you're starting out in threat hunting and like if you're looking into what to learn first, I mean, MITRE attack itself is a good roadmap, right? If you focus on just learning one technique a day, you got yourself a learning roadmap for, depending on how quick you learn, could be 1 year, could be 1.5, or could be 2, and that's a good plan to have, right? I mean, that's, so.
Yeah. I think if you're doing lunch and learn type activities in your environment. Like give one of your more junior analysts that opportunity to present one of the MITRE techniques. Is really simple thing to do. So there's enough in each technique. I haven't come across one where I've gone, okay, I read this and I still don't know where to go to learn more. Like every time you at least have the technique ID. A lot of researchers out there, like for process injection, for instance, if you just Google the technique ID for process injection, you're going to get a lot of reports about people using it. You're going to get a lot of research about new process injection techniques. So because it's becoming ubiquitous to do this, like everything is, almost every good piece of reporting is including the MITRE attack technique. So it's really good to pivot and find more resources with. So.
Yep. Sounds right. Okay, so do you want to switch to the tools, or I guess we didn't speak much also about the leadership in threat hunting team, so maybe we should cover that a little bit. And
yeah, I kind of touched in on a little bit about shielding from the denial of service style questions that you can get when there's a sense of urgency at your SOC. But what do you think are some other good qualities?
Yeah, so yeah, making sure the team works together, making sure there's good spirit, that it's not exhausted, and yeah, always communicate. So it's important to make sure that threat hunting team's value is not only that the process is done, but that reported to the right stakeholders in business. And depending on how big your organization is, it could be also interfacing with the red team, right? Because at the end of the day, threat hunting team and red team, they don't work against each other, right? There's a goal to improve security, which in reality, it's not always like that. I mean, seeing good examples and bad examples. So yeah, good leader should first and foremost communicate and care about the team. Yeah, working with incident response team is also very important, right? Threat intelligence team. So pretty much everybody and every function you have in the organization, make sure it's all interconnected, right? Because that's how it all works together and better. Yeah, other than that, I think that's all. That already makes a very good leader.
Yeah, I think just to double down on the communication, like the leader of the threat hunting team should be helping, develop those relationships with other teams, and ensuring that your threat hunters basically are doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is hunting for threats. So that's my 2 cents on leadership. So I think we can move on to tools. Right. So hunting is, I would just like to start with, hunting is more than EDR. So we'll get into some of the other log sources maybe that are important. So Andrii, do you have anything to start us off with on tools?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you summarized it right. It's more than EDR. It's also more than IOC match. I mean, IOC match is, yeah, it's probably worth another separate discussion because it's not exactly threat hunting, right? And yeah, we should also touch Sigma and yeah, pretty much all the tools that makes it work, right? So it's probably always good to talk about data collection, right? So where do we get our data? I mean, we mentioned already today, like you should have network. You don't always know. You cannot count that you always have the right data, right? So first of all, yes, not everything that runs EDR. Also, if it's really a bad attack, EDR may be disabled, right? I've seen cases where, either red team or adversary takes down like a world-class EDR in a matter of a couple of minutes. The worst part is no alert that the agent is down, right? And that's obviously opens up a window of opportunity for attacker to, deploy any kind of tools, establish persistence, and so on and so on. So, yeah, we have to rely on different sources of telemetry. So we don't have host telemetry look into network. And since it comes to mind, first be proficient with something that is common in every organization. Like if you have Microsoft infrastructure, you better have your Windows event logs, right? And you should have either yourself or a specialist on the team who really understands what's the difference between different event IDs and which of them need to be there. Again, checking the data quality is important. mentioning, favorite example is Kerberos attack, where a lot of seams were not exactly parsing the Kerberos tickets data, and it was a nice research and plenty of Sigma rules which would detect Kerberos, but some seams mismapped the encryption type with error code, and you would think that it reports your encryption type and the code is different from RC4, so everything's okay, but in reality, you would miss the important events. So data quality is important. On Windows logs, on cloud, cloud is just somebody else's computer, and like on the cloud, you can count on clouds, right? Count on the cloud logs. For misconfigurations, again, for standard things like non-standard hours, anomalous data volumes, provisioning of the new, machines and new access rights. Important thing to keep in mind about the cloud logs, they're usually not real time in your SIEM. So if you think about most IaaS and PaaS and SaaS applications, let's make sure you test how much time it takes for a log to arrive in your SIEM, because you'd be surprised that the lag can be anywhere between hours to days, to sometimes even few days, even on the most common IaaS platforms. So but it doesn't mean that cloud telemetry shouldn't be connected. Like it provides a lot of useful data. Maybe you have some comments, Adam, on this part, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so tools and data, like I've always grouped them into two different types of tools. You have the tools that are providing passive data, that's your Windows event logs, your sysmon, the cloud logs, ATT&CK, firewall logs. So these sources are the kinds of sources that tell you if something, they tell you that something happened, whether it was malicious or not. So whereas your IDS and IPS and your antivirus and some EDRs are even in this category, where they're only letting you know, hey, this is suspicious. So for threat hunters, I think there's a lot of value in both of them, but most of the time, the best content is written off those passive data sources, and the analytics is best off those passive data sources, just because you're able to see everything. So you're not relying on someone else's research or someone else's detection logic to tell you what happened on the network and if it's suspicious or not. You're able to write your own and build off of it. So I think that's my preference, and I think some EDR vendors are moving in that direction too, where it's just like, and I think kudos. I think Zeek, the folks behind Zeek understand this the best, maybe followed by Sysmon, which is we need to get the data and the telemetry in a format that's useful to threat hunters and useful to our security analysts. So like syslog format, I think everyone on this call can agree, is kind of horrendous to work with and so difficult to parse. And a lot of times the messages are so small that you have to, like SSH is like there's like 5 different events that get logged if someone just authenticates and creates a new session. So it's like those sorts of data sources, I think it would be really nice, if anyone has to clean those up a bit. I think like AuditBeat from Elastic does a pretty good job of cleaning some of that stuff up, but we need to get it in a format that's as useful as possible and in a passive format, so that the analysts themselves can decide if this is malicious or not some logic that someone wrote 3 years ago during the initial content push for the EDR, and then they stopped developing on it, and now it's they got a high remarks and that's all they cared about. But no, we want to enable our analysts to hunt the data at their own leisure. Let their imagination be the blocker, not what data you're getting. So besides that, like, I completely agree with Andrii. It's a lot more than just, am I getting this data source or not? So am I getting Windows event logs? Yes or no? Oh, yes, we are. We're getting Windows event logs from everything. Okay, well, what does the mappings look like? Am I able to for instance, a common issue in Elastic, I wrote a blog about it in February, is case sensitivity. Like the keyword field in Elastic is a case sensitive field. Is the detection logic that we're writing to automatically find things case insensitive, or is it case sensitive? So if it's case sensitive, which for instance, most of the signal rules released publicly by Elastic are all case sensitive rules. And so all it will take is for an adversary to change the capitalization of one thing and that rule is bypassed completely. So it's more, it's more than just, am I getting the data or not? And do I have a detection logic or not? Is a detection logic is the data coming in a timely manner from everything in a format that works? And is my detection logic doing what I think the intent of it is to do? Is my detection logic meeting the intent? So those are definitely things to be aware about with your tools. And it definitely helps a lot to try and break them. Try to break your own tools. Try to find things that are wrong on a regular basis. It's more than just having a watcher or some logic out there that tells you, hey, this log source went down. You need to really know when things break in your SIM, so that when you have an incident, you need to know where your gaps might be, and so you can account for them. So if you don't, like a lot of data anymore, like you have your Splunk forwarder or your WinLogB or whatever you're using to forward logs, it's going to some Kafka instance, and then from Kafka to whatever the ingest is on your SIM, and then into your SIM where your detection logic lies. And in all of those steps, for the most part, there can be bad filtering that can be hurting you, what I call greedy filtering. So that's when someone says, conhost.exe is legitimate. So anytime I see an event that contains conhost in it at all, in any field, then I'm going to drop it. Well, that's greedy, because conhost is a very, very common process, but as we learned not too long ago, it got converted kind of into a lull bin because it can now be used to spawn child processes. So if you were deciding, hey, we're just going to drop all conhost, anything with conhost in it, and then someone came into your environment and used conhost to spawn something malicious, now all of a sudden you're not getting those alerts, and nothing in your SIM is going to detect on it. So yeah, completely just re-emphasizing what Andrii kind of said about data sources, which is it's more than just ensuring that that the checkbox to send them to your SIM is checked.
Yeah, I think also on Conhost example, it's one of the things that as hunters we want, like if data can be collected, any kind of telemetry that could be used, so we want it to be collected, right? Yes, versus like doing a very efficient SIM deployment, you probably want only to collect the data that you can convert into alerts, right? If you would have a one-to-one conversion of a log line to an alert in a SIM, it will be super cost efficient, but it will only help you to discover that attacks that are common knowledge, right? Which is not useful to threat hunters, right? Because we want to have data which maybe today was not considered very useful, but tomorrow a new exploit comes out, a new technique is revealed, and we can historically query this data and find the patterns, right? So yeah, it's always a struggle to manage costs, but I think also that's why we see the rise of Elastic and the likes for threat hunting, right? Especially like you would have a production SIM cluster on your Splunk or Elastic, but you also can run a test cluster where you would store data for extra period, you know, something that is less costly, but may be handy in future, right? So yeah. All data we can get, that's pretty much the philosophy.
Yeah, so like to reiterate on that, like I think you know, FireEye always releases their mean time to detection, or their dwell time, average dwell time. It's actually gone down. It's down to like 57 days, but I wonder how much of that is really like because of the prominence of ransomware dropping it down. So you know you're infected. The dwell time of a ransomware infection is, you know, week at, you know, it's getting, totally. The adversary is encrypting everything within a week normally now. So So of course the dwell time is down because they're saying we're here and we want up $2 million to decrypt everything for you. But so yeah, going into like log retention, like a year is in my opinion minimum. If you're not keeping a year somewhere, then you are probably going to be having an incident where you find during your scoping, you're going to identify that they've been there longer than your log retention for sure, eventually. So yeah, that's huge. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about IOC versus threat hunting. I know, Andrii, you kind of brought it up before, but so for those of you who are maybe just starting out a threat hunting program, we would like to kind of warn you against this idea that threat hunting is just comparing a list of IOCs with your data, right? So that's just a basic like correlation, and really depending on your threat feed, it can be super useful or super distracting. So if you are getting really rich event feeds from you know, a top world performing provider, then maybe you get more value out of this as a threat hunting team, because generally that kind of intelligence is actually preemptive. So there's IOCs that exist pre-attack, and there's IOCs that exist after they've been burnt. So 99% of the free IOCs out there are from attacks that have been burnt, meaning someone made an attack, there were some domains that were used in that attack, then a researcher out there basically did their threat intelligence and exposed all their infrastructure, and then they decided to say, hey, this list of 50 domains, watch out for it, it's APT Whataburger or whatever. Just making up a random APT name. So yeah. Those types of IOCs, sometimes threat actors reuse their IOCs. So it depends on how much you know about that threat actor. Have they reused infrastructure in the past or not? Like if you're interested in it as a threat hunter anyways. So maybe that kind of stuff should be left to your threat intelligence team to worry about. But for threat hunters, we should be more interested in those preemptive IOCs, which is either research that your threat intel team is doing internally to track adversary infrastructure before they use it, or from third parties who are world-class threat intelligence providers. So those sources of events can be really useful for your threat hunting team, but not so much your just generic IOC feeds, in our opinion. So Andrii, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well. I mean, IOC matching is not by definition as threat hunting, right? In ideal world, and also in terms of evolution, where we're headed is that you pretty much have all the IOCs flying into a SIEM to enrich data in real time, which is going to convert to less than 1% to alert ratio, because like Adam said, yeah, it's pretty much the IOCs are coming in, they're usually from a burned infrastructure. I mean, in the past we've seen, right, like if you take Black Energy attack, the command and control service was the same for nearly 8 months, but I don't think we'll see that very often in the future, right? You usually have brand new APs, brand new hashes and domains, but the more value comes when you retrospectively can search the data and enrich it, because it can give you clues in threat hunting. Like if you have matched a certain actor, you could try other detections like Sigma rules and try to find those unknowns. So yeah, IOC match by itself is not a threat hunting. It can be an input for kicking off a threat hunting procedure. Yes. Should you uncover IOCs during threat hunting? Yes, you should, and share them internally into communities. That's exactly how they are produced. Another thing about the speed is that for a threat intelligence vendor to produce IOCs, they need to attach it to usually some kind of report, right? And creating intelligence takes time. Somebody needs to write those reports, read those reports, approve those reports, and it takes days usually, right? Instead, focusing on the techniques and creating content queries, playbooks, detections allows you to find evil without necessarily knowing who is behind it, right? You just can know that this is not right, this is a malicious behavior. I don't know what actor is using it, but the capability is there. Maybe it will be used by red team in a test. Maybe it will be used by a big APT actor or by cybercrime. But if you have means to hunt for it and find it, then you're kind of ahead. You're more on proactive side of things. And that's usually what we are pushing for, because, yeah, that's probably on that subject. Okay,
yeah, definitely. So IoCs are, I mean, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the pyramid of pain, but IoCs are almost entirely covering the lower part of that pyramid. So it's all stuff that can be easily changed. Whereas behaviors, we could write a Sigma rule today, a Sigma detection today that will detect an adversary behavior through 3 or 4 years from now. So it's really, really important. And it's really important not just to look at the adversary, what the adversaries are doing, but what other offensive researchers are doing, because a lot of times you'll see adversaries also switch up their tactics and TTPs. So behaviors, if you're writing detection logic that is too narrow, you are writing, even if it's for a behavior. So if you say, I wrote detection logic to detect run DLL loading an unsigned DLL, run DLL32 loading an unsigned DLL, and it calls the export banana hammock. Okay. If you write that detection, that is fundamentally an IOC. If you write a detection to look for unusual run DLL32 DLLs being passed to run DLL32, that is more behavior. So you have to be careful, even in your more behavioral technique-based rules, to make sure you're not writing IOCs, because chances of the export banana hammock being called again in the future is much lower than just an unusual DLL being passed to run 32 32 DLL. So that's just an example of how even threat hunting content can become IOCs by accident if you're not careful. And so lastly, we have the process. Andrii, did you have anything to kick us off with process?
Yeah, I think pretty much, yeah, finalizing it all, looking into the process. It's important to understand that you need to have an action plan and kind of know who does what before you dive into real-time situation where you need to act. And probably the most important part is that we didn't talk much about speed today, right? But the thing that's going to limit you most is if your system that you work with is slow, right? And that's also why we favor fast systems. So like literally, you need to have the right process, you need to have the tools at the ready, you need to have skills, and you need to make sure you get response fast, like, because everything can really break if like it takes you 1 hour to return the query results. Yeah, but that's of course comes to preparation phase. I think, yeah, on the process side of things, yeah, there is OODA loop that a lot of people are talking about and can be applied to many things. And there is also some practical knowledge. So, Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, so so I have this image here of basically a model for threat hunting. There's some other ones out there. There's one that a researcher put out, and it's on SANS website if you just look up threat hunting model. But this is one simplified version of a threat hunting model that I came out with recently. So it's kind of a work in progress, but I think it kind of captures the process. So I call it peer or peers. So you have your preparation, which is all the things we talked about, your personal skills, the internal knowledge of your network, the external knowledge of what your adversaries are doing, knowing what your data sources are and where your gaps are, and the scope of your network to include what things like naming conventions and where your golden nuggets are and all that kind of stuff. So then from there you go into enlightenment. So enlightenment in threat hunting is where you get that idea for your hypothesis. So if it's a tweet from Florian Roth or whoever, or that a lot of people are following on Twitter, for instance, would be an example of enlightenment, where you're learning about a new technique. So this can be gleaned from any data source. It can be gleaned from MITRE. It could be gleaned from Git, from like the Sigma repository on GitHub. It could be gleaned from new research that just came out, or even just a tweet. So, or perhaps one of these podcasts one day. So this is an enlightenment of just basically making you aware of something that you're concerned about. And it can also even be peer getting compromised. So some peer might say, hey, we got hit by APT Sloppy Joes, and Sloppy Joes, they used the squiggly do technique, but they use it in this unusual way. And we think that if you look in your environment and you see this, you probably have been attacked by Sloppy Joes. So that's the enlightenment phase, and then execution is actually the formalization of the hypothesis. So a hypothesis is not just like, it's not just an adversary can use squiggly do. A hypothesis is a little bit more than that. It's like hypothesis would be adversary can use squiggly do. You match it with your data source. So hypothesis can use squiggly do. I have sysmon on my endpoints, and therefore I believe that if I search for these keywords in sysmon, I will detect this adversary. That's your full hypothesis, right? And then the tooling, the actual writing of the detection logic is in this stage. Also simulation and emulation. So if you're paranoid and you're not certain that your detection logic is going to work, because you're human and you can make errors, you should probably be simulating in an environment, in a safe environment, the attack, so that you can actually look and see if your detection logic is firing. This isn't possible for everything, especially like CVEs. So sometimes, for instance, recently with the print spooler type CVEs that have come out in the last 2 years, like there's always been like, oh, well, we have this hypothesis that if someone does compromise a host using the print spooler vulnerability or exploit, then we believe that we should be able to detect some unusual logic with print spooler. So you don't actually have the CVE yet, personally the POC, to emulate it, but you just have this idea that maybe if we look for strange print spooler activity, we can detect something. So that's an example. And yeah. So I think that's pretty good coverage of that one. And then you have response. So response is the bit of triage that everyone has to do in threat hunting, and reviewing a lot of response and passing things off to another team that does IR, or possibly something that you're doing internally. So then the last one is share, and it's grayed out because it's kind of optional. How are you? Your sharing is up to your company. Not everyone shares, and that's okay. Not everyone needs to share. But if you can share, at least with your partners, hey, we have this hypothesis, and it helped us detect this thing. Here's a Sigma rule. Here's a Yara rule. Here's a Splunk query. Here's an Elastic query that we used. It can be, help each other out. That's the only way we're gonna survive this mess. And then, of course, the whole kind of what Andrii was getting at with speed a little bit is automate. So automation drives threat hunting. Like the more you can automate, the more you can do manual threat hunting. So for everything that you can automate in threat hunting, you want to do it, and then you can leave yourself to do those more. Personally, what I find to be more fun is the actual like manual data review. Maybe I'm unusual for that, but the more you can automate on the back end, the more free time you have to do manual review of what's going on your network. So this kind of falls into the OODA loop a little bit, not completely, but yeah. So that's our process, or my process. Peer for threat hunting, and with that, Andrii, unless you have anything else, I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, I think this was all pretty good, and yeah. Unless there are any questions we can answer. Was there anything in chat, because I didn't see it?
Yeah, I think I may have left Q&A off of this one because it's not showing up. So we apologize for that. But
yeah. We would be very happy to hear feedback, and if definitely there will be some email coming out to everybody who registered, and you can access to this video if you could not attend it live. But yeah, if there are any questions, feel free to reach out on Twitter or an email, and yeah, we'll follow up. And
yeah,
thank you, Aaron. This was great.
Yeah, and we'll see you. We're definitely scheduled to do this next month, so we'll see you then. And don't forget to try the challenge. Really want to see some people finish it. So, all right, have a nice rest of your weekend, everyone. Thanks.
Be safe. Cheers.